What you're about to hear is one of the strangest and most haunting disappearances ever recorded in the American wilderness. A woman vanishes without a trace in a forest known for both its beauty and its mystery. Her belongings are found scattered, her car abandoned, and witnesses claim to have seen her wandering barefoot, only to be seen again a year later as something else entirely. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and stay until the end, because this story doesn't just raise questions, it challenges everything we think we know about how people disappear. In late June of 2020, Sandra Lynn Johnson Hughes, a 54-year-old woman with a quiet, wandering spirit, packed up her car and drove deep into the Sierra National Forest. The world was in chaos. The COVID-19 pandemic had shut down cities and trapped millions inside their homes. But for Sandra, it was an opportunity, an escape from the noise and fear that had defined the year. She had always been a traveler. Friends described her as free-spirited, independent, and capable. She had worked in co-ops and organic farms, living for short periods in different states. But she wasn't just drifting without purpose. Sandra had a fascination with nature, with the silence of it, the kind that forces you to confront yourself. In the final week of June, she loaded her 2001 silver Saab with food, camping gear, and supplies she had just bought in Fresno, California. Her family knew she was heading toward the forest that borders Yosemite National Park, but they weren't worried. She was experienced. This was supposed to be just another trip. Sandra was last seen in good spirits, smiling, excited to be on her own again. But nobody could have imagined that within days she would vanish without a trace. When the first report came into the Madera County Sheriff's Office on July 2nd, it wasn't from her family. It came from a vacationing couple who had stumbled upon a campsite hidden deep in the woods. They described it as disturbed, a tent flattened, food and personal papers scattered on the ground. It didn't look like the aftermath of a robbery or an attack. It looked wrong. Among the debris, the couple found something that made them uneasy, a birth certificate and social security card belonging to Sandra Hughes. It was as if she had dropped the proof of her own existence in the dirt and walked away. Deputies tried to reach the location but couldn't. Fallen trees blocked the road. They had to send a Forest Service ranger on an ATV to reach the site. When the officer arrived, she found a chaotic scene, clothes thrown about, a sleeping bag, cooking supplies, and receipts from recent camping purchases. Everything looked as though it had been tossed from a car. There were no footprints, no blood, no signs of struggle, just silence, and the lingering question that would haunt everyone who investigated this case: what happened to Sandra Hughes? When Forest Service Officer Wise finally reached Sandra Hughes's abandoned campsite, she immediately sensed that something wasn't right. The site didn't resemble the organized layout of an experienced camper. Instead, it looked like chaos. Gear flung everywhere, containers open, clothing draped over branches as if tossed in a hurry. There were food wrappers, canned goods, and even personal papers scattered across the clearing, yet oddly, nothing seemed stolen. It was as if Sandra herself had thrown everything around, then simply walked away. Officer Wise photographed what she could, carefully tagging every item before dusk fell. The forest was silent, heavy with that particular stillness that makes every movement echo. When she radioed her report back to the Madera County Sheriff's Office, she described the site as disordered but not ransacked. The difference was subtle but important. It meant this wasn't likely a robbery or animal disturbance. Someone had done this intentionally. Deputies Williams and Chambers tried to reach the location the next day, but fallen trees and steep terrain blocked their path. They reviewed the personal documents found at the scene: Sandra's birth certificate, social security card, and a list of names and phone numbers. When Deputy Williams called one of the numbers, a woman answered, Sandra's niece. She was surprised to hear from the police, though not alarmed. Sandra often went weeks, even months, without contacting anyone. She told the deputy that Sandra had last spoken to her mother, Sandra's sister, a few days earlier on June 26th. She had mentioned camping in the Sierras, possibly waiting in Fresno to finalize her car registration. The niece gave them a phone number for Sandra's cell. The deputies tried calling. No answer. They contacted Verizon and requested a location ping. The company reported that the phone was off or dead, with the last signal recorded on July 1st, near the very same area where the campsite had been found. To investigators, the timeline was starting to narrow. Sandra had been alive and in the area up until at least July 1st, but there was still no clear sign of where she had gone after leaving her chaotic camp. The following morning, the search expanded. Flyers were printed, rangers were alerted, and nearby campers were interviewed. That's when the first confirmed sighting came in, from a woman staying at Granite Creek Campground, about 17 miles away. She said she'd seen Sandra on June 29th, walking alone early in the morning. It was cold, around 30 degrees Fahrenheit, but Sandra wore only shorts, a tank top and flip-flops. She didn't look distressed or injured, just detached. The witness said Sandra didn't ask for help, didn't make eye contact, and simply disappeared down the trail. It was the first, but far from the last, time someone would claim to have seen her. The officers began to realize something chilling. This wasn't a case of a woman lost in the woods. It was a woman moving through them, purposefully, and then vanishing. On July 5th, 2020, a group of off-roaders driving along Besaw Road near Brophy Meadow made a startling discovery. Down a steep embankment, half hidden by brush and pine trees, lay a silver 2001 Saab. The front end was crumpled, the windshield cracked, and the passenger door hung open. The car looked as though it had veered off the dirt road and rolled several feet before coming to rest in a small clearing. When deputies arrived, they confirmed what the off-roaders suspected. The vehicle belonged to Sandra Hughes. The engine was cold, suggesting it had been there for days. Strangely, the car didn't look like it had been in a major accident. It was more like someone had intentionally driven it off the road. Inside, everything was neat. Sandra's camping gear, notebooks, and cooking utensils were organized with precision. Even her clothes were folded in the back seat. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no footprints leading away from the crash site. Just a camping chair placed beside the vehicle, as if she had sat down to rest after the incident. Deputy Williams found this detail deeply unsettling. It was almost too calm, too deliberate. It looked like she was still there, he said later in his report, like she had just stepped away for a moment. Search and rescue teams began combing the surrounding area immediately. They brought in dogs, drones, and even a helicopter to cover the dense terrain. From the air, the forest looked endless. Miles of rugged granite ridges, steep drops, and thick pine canopy. On the ground, the search was slow and exhausting. Within hours, they discovered something that gave them hope. Roughly a half-mile from the vehicle, in a patch of meadowland, a team found a single barefoot footprint matching Sandra's size. It was pointed downhill, away from the road. Investigators believed she had walked away after the crash, possibly dazed or injured. Around the same time, 2 hikers reported seeing a woman matching Sandra's description near Red Top Mountain. She was barefoot, wearing shorts and a light-colored shirt. One of the hikers offered her water, but she declined, saying she was fine and didn't need help. She smiled, waved, and continued walking into the trees. To rescuers, this created an agonizing contradiction. Sandra was clearly alive and mobile after the crash, but each sighting placed her further from safety and deeper into one of the most unforgiving landscapes in California. As the days passed and temperatures dropped, the urgency increased. Deputies feared she might be suffering from confusion or disorientation, possibly caused by dehydration, head injury, or psychological distress. Yet her movements didn't seem random. They were purposeful, almost methodical, as if she were following something or someone unseen. It was becoming clear that Sandra Hughes hadn't simply gone missing. She was walking towards something, and whatever it was leading her farther from the world that was still searching for her. By the morning of July 6, 2020, the search for Sandra Hughes had become a full-scale operation. The Madera County Sheriff's Office, Search and Rescue, SAR teams, volunteer rangers, and even local residents joined the mission. The focus was on a 30-square-mile radius surrounding the crash site near Brophy Meadow, but the forest was vast and the terrain was merciless. Helicopters swept over Besaw Road, scanning ridgelines and meadows for signs of movement. On the ground, searchers moved in grids, shouting Sandra's name into the still air. Dogs sniffed for human scent, but results were inconsistent. Trails that started strong seemed to fade into nothing. At one point, trackers followed a faint barefoot trail that curved along Long Meadow, only for it to vanish near a creek crossing. It was as if Sandra had stepped into the water and disappeared. The dogs circled, confused. No further tracks were found on the opposite bank. Deputies theorized she may have tried to use the creek as a guide to move downhill, perhaps seeking a road or a ranger station. But if that was her plan, she never made it. On July 7th, a new tip came in. Two campers near Fernandez Trailhead, roughly 5 miles from Brophy Meadow, claimed they had seen a woman walking barefoot along the road the day before. She looked sunburned, exhausted, and covered in dust. When one of them asked if she needed help, she smiled weakly and said, "No, I'm okay. I live here." Then she walked off into the brush. The phrase, "I live here," puzzled investigators. It was the same line reported by multiple witnesses over the coming weeks. It painted a picture of a woman who wasn't lost, at least not in her own mind. Meanwhile, Sandra's family was notified officially. Her niece and sister arrived from Oregon, devastated but determined to help. They described her as intelligent but increasingly distant in recent years. She was searching for peace, her sister told detectives, but she thought she could only find it alone. The sheriff's office posted flyers and asked the public to report any sightings. Calls came in from hikers, campers, and locals across the forest, some believable, others strange. One caller claimed to have seen a woman covered in dirt, moving like she was in a trance. Another described a barefoot woman walking near Besaw Road, carrying a backpack made from a torn bedsheet. None of these reports led to her. Each sighting seemed to move her further south, deeper into the mountains, as if she were being drawn away from civilization. By July 10th, the official search had logged over 300 volunteer hours, with no trace, no footprints, clothing, or scent confirmed. Helicopters spotted animal carcasses mistaken for human remains. Every lead ended the same way, nowhere. To the volunteers, it was beginning to feel less like a rescue and more like chasing a ghost. While search teams combed the Sierra National Forest, detectives were busy piecing together who Sandra Hughes really was. On paper, she was an experienced outdoorswoman, skilled, resourceful, and independent. But the deeper investigators dug, the more they began to suspect something was profoundly wrong, long before she ever entered the woods. Detective Cox, who handled the interviews, began calling Sandra's old friends, co-workers, and family members. What he uncovered painted a portrait of a woman who had undergone a dramatic transformation in the years before her disappearance. Her friend Lydia, who had known her for nearly 20 years, said Sandra had once been grounded and practical. She was the kind of person who planned everything, Lydia told the detective, but something changed around 2017. She started talking about energy, spirits, and beings that lived in the forest. This shift seemed to trace back to a retreat she had attended in Idaho, a New Age spiritual gathering called Soul Play. There, participants experimented with meditation, fasting, and what some described as hallucinogenic exploration. Sandra had gone with a woman named Nia, who ran a YouTube channel called Nia's Corner of the Universe. After that trip, Sandra's worldview shifted dramatically. She began speaking about light entities, Bigfoot, and forest fairies, creatures she said were guardians of the woods. She told one friend that she could feel them watching whenever she camped alone. Her brother recalled a disturbing conversation just months before she vanished. Sandra had said she was learning to commune with nature through silence, and that she no longer needed the material world. She said people had forgotten how to listen, he told police. She believed she was meant to live between worlds, Despite this strange behavior, Sandra was not known to be violent or self-destructive. Friends described her as kind but deeply detached from reality. They said she believed the pandemic was a sign to return to the earth. Detectives wondered if her decision to go into the Sierra alone was not an accident at all, but a pilgrimage, a journey she thought would somehow bring her closer to enlightenment. Then came the detail that truly unsettled investigators. According to one friend, Sandra had once claimed she could disappear at will, that her spirit could leave her body and walk freely in nature. To the detectives, these weren't just eccentric beliefs anymore. They might be the key to understanding why she wandered barefoot through a freezing forest, waving at strangers but refusing help. Her actions seemed consistent with someone in the grip of psychosis, or at least a powerful delusion. Yet even those who knew her best refused to call her unstable. They said she was different, not broken. But as weeks passed without a trace, it became increasingly clear that Sandra's spiritual journey might have led her somewhere she could never return from. By the summer of 2021, Sandra Hughes had been missing for nearly a year. The official search was over, but her story refused to fade. People who hiked the same trails where she vanished claimed to feel watched. Campers reported strange noises, footsteps circling tents in the night, faint humming, and whispers that carried through the trees. Then, in July 2021, a post appeared on Facebook that would send shockwaves through Madera County. A California couple, Jake and Victoria Gorber, shared that their 3-year-old son, Caden, had seen something while they were picnicking near Shut-Eye Peak, only a few miles from where Sandra's campsite had been found. According to Victoria's account, Caden suddenly froze, pointing toward an open meadow. He whispered, "Mom, there's a lady over there. She needs help." When she asked where, the boy said, "She's lying face down. She can't talk. She's dead." Victoria thought her son was imagining things until he began describing details that made her blood run cold. "She has blue hair, a black shirt and jeans. She's by the tree, Mum." The description matched Sandra Hughes almost exactly. Shaken, the Gorbers ended their trip early and later posted about the event on social media, asking if anyone knew of a missing person in the area. Within hours, commenters flooded the post with links to Sandra's case. When deputies visited the family the next day, they were visibly disturbed. The child repeated the same story, down to Sandra's clothing, and when shown photos of her, he reportedly pointed and said, "That's her." Investigators went back to the meadow with the Gorbers, marking the area and searching for remains. They found nothing, no disturbed soil, no clothing, no trace of a body. Still, deputies documented the incident carefully, noting that Caden appeared sincere and calm. Word spread quickly. News outlets began calling it the ghost of Shut-Eye Peak. Paranormal groups flocked to the forest, claiming to feel Sandra's presence. One psychic insisted she saw a dark-haired man carrying a woman's body down a trail, describing a shallow grave near a burned tree. Deputies followed up, but the supposed location was within the creek fire burn zone, where thousands of acres were scorched and unstable. Nothing was ever found there either. To some, this all felt like desperate fantasy. To others, it was proof that Sandra's spirit still lingered, trapped in the forest she had loved, and perhaps died in. For the detectives who'd worked the case, the ghost sighting was just another cruel reminder that there were still no answers, no remains, no explanation, and no closure. Yet quietly, a few investigators admitted that even they couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there. After the viral post about the ghost of Shut-Eye Peak, the case of Sandra Hughes exploded across social media. True crime enthusiasts, spiritualists, and psychics all claimed to know what had happened. To the Madera County Sheriff's Office, it became a balancing act between maintaining credibility and addressing the growing public obsession. Within weeks, deputies were inundated with emails and calls. Some people insisted they had seen her wandering the woods, thin but alive. Others swore they felt her presence in their dreams. One woman, calling herself a forest medium, said Sandra's spirit had become part of the mountain, living energy, feeding the wilderness she loved. But among all the noise, one message stood out. A man named Jory from Belgium contacted detectives saying he had consulted a psychic who could pinpoint Sandra's location. The psychic claimed Sandra was murdered by a man described only as a dark figure, who allegedly worked at a nearby store and buried her near Red's Peak, inside Yosemite National Park. At first, the story seemed absurd, but Jory was persistent. He sent satellite images, marked coordinates, and even enhanced photos that he claimed showed Sandra's body. Investigators reviewed them carefully, but the images were nothing more than blurred terrain, with streaks of light misinterpreted as limbs or fabric folds. Still, Detective Williams, who had been with the case since the beginning, humored the lead. He drove miles of fire-damaged forest roads, scaling steep slopes and scorched creek beds, looking for any sign of a grave. He found nothing. The coordinates led nowhere but ash and twisted tree stumps. The following month, another group of psychics requested official permission to conduct a séance at Shut-Eye Peak. They brought equipment, cameras, and a so-called spirit medium who claimed to communicate directly with Sandra. She said Sandra was carried by a man and buried under a tree where sunlight never touches. Deputies recorded her statement and noted that she provided no specific location or physical evidence. To the frustration of the sheriff's office, each new psychic claim stirred up the public again, generating another wave of calls and false reports. Volunteers returned to the forest, digging shallow holes, searching caves, and filming evidence for online audiences. The case began drifting from a missing person investigation into a folklore phenomenon. Sandra became a ghost story, a cautionary tale told around campfires in the Sierras. Privately, detectives admitted that the psychic theories drained resources and focus from real leads. Yet, despite their skepticism, they shared one belief with the spiritualists. Sandra was still out there, whether in body, spirit, or memory. The forest, vast and silent, had claimed her, but it had also ensured that no one could forget her. By mid-2022, 2 years after Sandra Hughes vanished, her name had nearly faded from the news. But inside the Madera County Sheriff's Office, her file was never closed. It sat on the corner of Detective Williams' desk, thick, weathered, and full of unanswered questions. That summer, a report came in from a local horseman riding near Chiquito Lake, just a few miles from Sandra's last known location. His dog had found what looked like a bone along the trail. He feared it might be human. Deputies Williams and Chambers hiked out immediately, joined by Officer Wise and a K-9 unit. The trail wound through scorched timber from the creek fire, a haunting landscape of blackened trunks and silent ash. About half a mile in, the team located the bone, sun-bleached, thin and half-buried in silt. Nearby, they found another, longer fragment. Photos were taken. Samples were bagged and sent for analysis, but within a week, results came back negative. The bones were not human. Another false start. Still, something about the location bothered Williams. It was too close to where Sandra's car had been found. If she'd been wandering barefoot and dehydrated, she wouldn't have gone far. The dense granite slopes, thick brush, and hidden ravines could have concealed her easily. She could be within 500 yards of where we stood, he said to Wise as they packed up. The following month, a small team of search and rescue veterans returned to the area for a renewed sweep. They hiked out from Besaw Road, retracing the path north toward Brophy Meadow. What they found wasn't remains, but something eerily familiar. Lying beneath a fallen log near a shallow creek bed was a sleeping bag, tattered but intact. Faded green fabric, water-stained, but still holding its shape. Officers recognized it immediately. It matched the type Sandra had been known to use. For reasons never made entirely clear, the bag was left there for over 2 years before it was finally collected for DNA testing in 2022. By the time deputies returned, animals had torn at the outer layers and sunlight had bleached most of it pale grey. DNA testing was ordered, but no results were ever published. For Williams, it was a grim confirmation that Sandra might never have left the mountain at all. Perhaps she had succumbed to exposure only days after her car went off the road. The Sierra's elements, snow, rain, and wildlife, could have erased her presence completely. Even so, every new discovery reignited the case. Each time a bone or piece of fabric appeared, hope flickered again, only to fade with every negative result. The forest, it seemed, was guarding its secret tightly, and the deeper investigators went, the clearer it became. If Sandra Hughes was ever going to be found, it would be the forest itself that decided when. In the months following the renewed searches, investigators decided to take a step back from the forest and return to the evidence, rebuilding Sandra Hughes' final timeline from every confirmed witness statement, phone record, and physical clue. Detective Williams and Deputy Cox began cross-referencing reports, photos, and handwritten notes from 2020. The goal was simple: trace her movements, moment by moment, until the trail ended. The story began with a pattern that looked rational at first. Sandra buying camping gear in Fresno in late June, emailing her family that she planned to spend time in nature. Then, as June turned into July, the pattern fractured. The first confirmed sighting was June 29th at Granite Creek Campground. A witness remembered her walking calmly through the camp at dawn, underdressed for the cold, wearing flip-flops. She didn't ask for help. She didn't speak. She just passed through the trees. 3 days later, on July the 2nd, a family stumbled upon her abandoned campsite off a dirt road labeled 5S13. Food, clothes, and personal documents, including her birth certificate and social security card, were scattered across the ground. It looked like someone had emptied her car in a panic. Her cell phone's final ping occurred July 1st, placing her near that very site. Whatever happened afterward, she had gone silent, digitally and physically. Then came the vehicle discovery. On July 3rd, witnesses saw a woman who matched Sandra's description standing barefoot in Brophy Meadow, waving quietly at off-roaders. Hours later, her Saab was found crashed off a steep embankment on 5S70 road just a few miles north. The airbags hadn't deployed, but the car bore fresh impact marks on the hood. Near the vehicle sat a camping chair and a pair of sandals, folded neatly on the hood. It was as if she'd taken a break to think, or perhaps to give up. Over the next 2 days, witnesses reported seeing her walking in different directions, always near the crash site, always alone. She declined every offer of help. One camper recalled her saying softly, "I live here." By July 5th, the sightings stopped. When investigators mapped each location, they realized Sandra had been circling a small 10-mile radius for nearly a week, moving from camp to car to creek, and back again. The erratic path suggested confusion, dehydration, or psychological distress. Yet there was no sign of struggle, no blood, and no indication of foul play. To Detective Williams, one detail stood out most: the sandals. They had been moved between sightings, found first beside the car, then later on its hood. Someone had returned to that vehicle after the crash. Had Sandra wandered the woods for days before collapsing somewhere nearby? Or had she disappeared deeper into places no one dared to look? The forest gave them a map, but no destination. By late 2023, the disappearance of Sandra Hughes had become one of the Sierra Nevada's most haunting mysteries. Officially, her case was still open. Unofficially, investigators admitted there was little left to search. Theories multiplied over the years. Some said she had suffered a head injury in the crash, wandered disoriented, and died of exposure in the forest's depths. Others believed her New Age beliefs pushed her toward a voluntary disappearance, an attempt to shed her old self entirely. There were even darker possibilities: a predator in the woods or a passerby who took advantage of her isolation. But despite endless speculation, no evidence of foul play ever surfaced. The forest, where she vanished, remains almost otherworldly, thick with pine, granite cliffs, and countless ravines where no human has set foot in decades. Searchers described it as a place that swallows sound. Helicopters flew over it for weeks after her disappearance, yet from above the canopy looks seamless, a living shield that hides whatever lies beneath. Those who were there during the search remember a feeling they couldn't explain. The air grew heavy as night fell, and some swore they heard faint humming in the distance, a woman's voice carried by the wind. Even Detective Williams, ever the skeptic, once admitted in an interview, "When we stopped the search that last evening, the forest went quiet, completely quiet. It felt like she was still there, watching us go." Her family still holds hope. Every few months her sister posts a message online. "We haven't forgotten you, Sandy. Wherever you are, we'll find you." But the truth is, the Sierra has claimed many souls before and will claim many more. Sandra's story stands out not only for her disappearance, but for what it represents: the fragile line between solitude and oblivion, peace and madness. Perhaps she really did go there seeking answers, believing the forest would reveal some higher truth. Perhaps in her final moments she believed it did. To this day, hikers passing through Brophy Meadow sometimes stumble upon old traces, a rusted spoon, a torn strap, a bit of canvas, and wonder if they once belonged to the woman who vanished chasing silence. Sandra Hughes remains missing. The forest remains silent. And some silences are never meant to be broken. If this story resonated with you, don't let it vanish like Sandra's trail did. Every missing person deserves to be remembered, and every mystery deserves to be told. Subscribe to our channel to uncover more true stories that hide behind headlines and forgotten police files. Share this video to keep Sandra's memory alive, because awareness is the only way we can bring light into the dark corners of these unresolved cases. Remember, some disappearances aren't just about who was lost, but what they were searching for.